this segment, I'd like to describe how to deal with genitival noun-noun relationships. If we go over to our ontology and look in the relations, we've identified 11 very specific relations for various genitival noun-noun relationships. For example, body part, Mary's hand or Mary's leg or Mary's foot. There's kinship, for example, John's brother or John's mother. And we would include legal relationships, such as John's wife or John's mother-in-law. There are others like possession, John's book, John's car, John's house, etc. So there are 11 very specific noun-noun relationships that we've identified, and for those relationships in the semantic representations, we use these very specific relation markers. However, there's actually an infinite number of genitival noun-noun relationships that can be encoded. For example, John's boss, or John's prayers, John's work, or John's life, John's friends, etc. Now we can't possibly identify semantically each one of those relationships. So we have those 11 very specific markers, but then for all other genitival noun-noun relationships, we insert this relation, which we call generic genitive. So here we are at adpositions 1-4, which produces John saw Mary's servant. Now this isn't Mary's slave. Mary's slave would be actual possession. But for servant, that's a different relationship. So we've marked it with a generic genitive marker. And to deal with these generic genitives, you right-click, and first let's get rid of those question marks by saying map this concept to target words. I'm going to enter a new target word that consists of just a space. I push the space key one time. And so now generic genitive is mapped to just one space. That eliminates the spaces. Now to deal with a generic genitive, we double-click on it, and we see a dialog that has the possessor, in this case Mary, and the possessum, in this case servant. And we need to specify how our target language encodes this particular combination of possessor and possessum. To do that, we click on the button called Feature Set, and we see our dialog that has all of the syntactic categories that are defined in TBTA. In this case, we're going to select noun phrases. Here are all the features that are defined for noun phrases. In this case, we're going to select thing-thing relationship. And here, we're going to enter the values. We're going to add values that describe how our language encodes various genitival relationships. Even though there are an infinite number of noun-noun genitival relationships, each language has just a small number of grammatical mechanisms for encoding those relationships. And for this demonstration, let's use English. English uses Saxon genitive. For example, that's apostrophe S, so we can say, for example, the man's hat. English also uses a Norman genitive. For example, the roof of the house. Norman genitives are encoded in English with of. We can have a bare stem genitive. For example, palace garden. So here you define however your language encodes various genitival noun-noun relationships. Then those values are available for us here in this drop-down. Now for Mary and servant, English will use a Saxon genitive. So we'll select Saxon genitive. And now, if we rest our cursor here, for thing-thing relationship, you'll see Saxon genitive. These genitival noun-noun relationship rules, as I've mentioned in previous segments, all of these rules, down to genitival noun-noun relationships, they are executed even before the semantic representation is displayed. All of the subsequent rules, starting at data grid adjustment rules, and all of the following rules, they're executed when we click the Generate button. But these genitival noun-noun relationships and all preceding rules are executed even before the semantic representations are displayed. So, Thing relationship has been set to Saxon genitive. Now we need to write a rule that will see that feature value and supply the appropriate morphology. Now in English, that's a clitic. That apostrophe S is a clitic. In a previous segment, we added some case markers. Let's add a new group. We'll call this Saxon genitive. And let's enter a rule. Add apostrophe S to all NPs marked with Saxon genitive. This will be a simple rule, not a table. We're just going to supply one clitic. The Saxon genitive in English is a postclitic. Let's mark it as a Saxon genitive. Now we can't actually enter an apostrophe into this control. If we try, I entered an apostrophe. There's a warning message. You cannot use an apostrophe. So we need to use some other character. Let's change that to this character. That's right below a tilde. That will be accepted. And then later we can write a find replace rule that will change that character to the apostrophe which we want. For our grammar topic, let's select possession. Okay. Oh, we need to indicate that this only applies to noun phrases that are marked with the Saxon genitive. So I'm going to select that option there. So all Saxon genitives will get the postclitic apostrophe S. And now if we click the generate button, okay, John saw Mary's servant. It's up to the phrase structure rules to position noun phrases that are marked as a Saxon genitive before this. So let's go, now that's a noun phrase structure rule. So let's go to our phrase structure rules for noun phrases. We're going to insert a new constituent. It'll be a noun phrase, and we want it to be a Saxon genitive. If you haven't entered a name, we don't need to do that. There it is at the top. And now if we execute our grammar, you'll see John, it should be saw, but we're not concerned about that in this segment. John saw Mary's servant. So that's how you deal with these generic genitives. You double click on them, you define the grammatical mechanisms that your language uses to encode these various noun-noun relationships, then you set a feature here, and then you write a later rule, whether it's a spell-out rule or a clitic rule or something, that will add the appropriate morphology for each type of genitival noun-noun relationship. Now there are some cases in the semantic representations that your language may not permit as a noun-noun combination. For example, we can say in English, John's work. Well, maybe in your language you can't say John's work as a noun-noun relationship. You might need to convert that particular combination to a relative clause, the work that John does. If you need to do that, that would be handled by a structural adjustment rule, and that will we'll describe those rules in a subsequent segment. That concludes this particular segment.